The morning it all started, Theo was elbow deep in a transmission, and his daughter was asking him why the sky was blue, and he gave her the wrong answer on purpose, just to see if she'd catch it. She did. "That's not right," Lily said, from her spot on the old stool by the workbench. She was 7, and she had her mother's way of tilting her head when she thought you were being ridiculous. Mrs. Fontaine said it's because of light scattering. "Rayleigh scattering," Theo said, without looking up. "So you knew." "I did." "Then why'd you say the wrong thing?" He pulled a rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. Then she went back to her book, apparently satisfied. Theo watched her for a second before turning back to the transmission. The garage smelled like oil and old rubber, and the particular kind of dust that only settles in places where people actually work. He'd built it that way deliberately. Not the smell, but the feeling. The sense that things got done here because someone cared enough to do them properly. The town of Merritt Falls, Ontario, wasn't the kind of place where things happened quickly. People brought him their cars in the same unhurried way they did everything else, mentioned it at the hardware store, or left a note in his box at the post office, or sometimes just pulled into the lot and sat in the car for a minute as though gathering the nerve. He didn't advertise. He didn't have a website, though his neighbor Pat had offered to make him one 3 times. He had a reputation, which, in a town of 4,000 people, was worth considerably more. He'd had a different kind of reputation once. For 11 years, he'd worked as a senior powertrain engineer at a firm in Waterloo. He'd had a salary that made people's eyes go wide, and a company phone, and a parking pass, and a wife named Claire who thought he worked too many hours and was usually right about that. Then Claire got sick, and then Claire died. And Theo spent 8 months not quite understanding what had happened before he woke up one morning and realized he'd been living in a house that no longer fit him. He packed what mattered. He took Lily, who was 4, and didn't yet understand that the world had changed, and he drove east and then north until they reached the town where his Uncle Pete had kept a garage for 40 years before his knees gave out. Uncle Pete was dead by then, too. But the garage wasn't. That was 3 years ago. Now Theo had a daughter who corrected him about light physics, and a garage with 4 bays and a coffee maker that only worked if you held the button down for 6 seconds, and a life that was smaller than the one he'd had before, but considerably more honest. The woman walked in on a Thursday afternoon in late September, when the light in the valley was the color of old brass, and Lily was at school, and Theo was replacing the clutch on a '94 Civic that belonged to one of the Wallace boys. He heard the car before he saw it, a sound that was wrong in 3 different ways simultaneously, the kind of wrong that makes an engineer's brain start sorting problems before his eyes have even focused. He straightened up and turned around. It was an Aston Martin DB9. Silver, probably 2006, maybe 2007. And it was driving on what sounded like a failing alternator combined with a cooling system that had been making its unhappiness known for some time. The car turned into his lot at a careful speed, as though the driver was aware things were precarious, and stopped. The door opened. The woman who got out was in her mid-30s, maybe, in the kind of clothes that looked simple until you noticed they weren't. Dark trousers, a gray jacket, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested a meeting she'd recently left or was about to attend. She looked at the garage with the expression of someone assessing a situation they hadn't planned for. She looked at Theo with the same expression. "This is a garage," she said. "It is," Theo said. "A working one." Most days. She looked back at the Aston Martin as though it had personally inconvenienced her. "I need someone to look at this. My navigation said there was a dealership 40 minutes from here, but I'm not confident the car will make 40 minutes. Theo walked over. He didn't need to look closely. The sounds were already giving him a clear picture, but he listened to the engine for a moment and then crouched and looked underneath and stood back up. "Your serpentine belt is close to failing," he said. "That's the sound. Coolant's low, probably a slow leak somewhere, and you've got something going on with your electrical. My guess is the alternator's struggling because the belt's slipping." She stared at him. "It's not 40 minutes worth of problems," he added. "It's here and now problems. Can you fix it?" "I can look at it today. Full repair, probably tomorrow morning depending on parts." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's not convenient." Theo didn't say anything to that, because there wasn't much to say. "Is there somewhere I can work?" she asked. I have calls. Hardware store has a cafe attached. Wi-Fi's reasonable. Hardware store cafe, she repeated as though testing the phrase. It's better than it sounds. She looked at the car again, and then back at him, and then she seemed to make some decision. Fine, I'll leave it with you. She said it in the tone of someone placing a significant amount of trust somewhere they hadn't planned to place it, and weren't entirely comfortable about it, but had assessed their options and concluded there weren't better ones. She told him her name was Sutton. Just that. Sutton. She had a card she handed him, which read Sutton Vane, Chief Executive, Vane Capital Partners, and a phone number that she said was her direct line and that he should call if anything changed. Theo put the card on the workbench. He watched her walk back out to the road toward the hardware store, moving the way people moved when they were used to covering distance efficiently, and then he went back to the Civic and finished the clutch before he started on the Aston Martin. Lily came home at 4 and immediately wanted to know whose car it was. Client, Theo said. It's pretty. She walked around it with her hands behind her back, which was her version of looking without touching. Is it old? 2006? Is that old for a car like this? It's old enough to have problems, Theo said. Lily nodded like this was a satisfying answer. He made pasta for dinner, and she told him about a project at school involving topographic maps, and he helped her mark elevations with colored pencil, and by 8 she was asleep. He went back out to the garage and worked until midnight. He found the coolant leak, hairline crack in a hose fitting, the kind of thing that starts small and announces itself catastrophically when you're least prepared for it. He ordered parts from his supplier in Kingston, flagged for early delivery, and then sat on the stool Lily used and drank cold coffee and thought about nothing particular. The next morning, Sutton Vane came back at 9. He was already under the car. How's it looking? She asked, from somewhere near the door. Better than last night. He rolled out on the creeper and stood up. Parts came in. Belt and hose are replaced. I'm working on the alternator now. She looked at the car. She had a coffee from the hardware store in her hand. She looked like she hadn't slept especially well, which surprised him somehow. She had the kind of presence that seemed like it would come with reliable sleep. You know these cars, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I spent a long time knowing engines, Theo said. Aston, Ferrari, Porsche. Different flavor, but same language. She tilted her head. Porsche? My uncle had a 1973 911 in that bay, he pointed. Spent 10 years on and off working on it. Never quite finished it. It's in storage now, at a facility outside of town. Something shifted in her expression that he couldn't immediately name. What would it take to finish it? Theo picked up his coffee and looked at her. Why? I collect, she said simply. Vintage Porsches, specifically. I have 2 at a facility in Toronto. The 73 is interesting. The production numbers that year were unusual. The company was still working out what the car wanted to be. He'd never heard anyone describe a production year that way before, what the car wanted to be, and something about it made him want to listen more carefully. A lot of hours, he said. It needs a full engine rebuild, bodywork on the passenger side, interior is gone. But the bones are right. They usually are with those, Sutton said. She stayed for another hour, which he hadn't expected. She didn't get in the way. She sat on the stool and took calls periodically, and when she wasn't on a call, she asked questions about what he was doing, and they weren't the questions of someone being polite. They were specific, informed questions, the kind that told him she'd actually done her reading at some point. At 11, she got a call that made her face go carefully neutral, in a way he'd noticed people did when they were trying not to react to something that bothered them. She stepped outside for that one. He could hear fragments, a name, Aldridge, which meant nothing to him, and a tone that was clipped and controlled. She came back in after 8 minutes and picked up her coffee cup and put it down again. Problem? Theo said without looking up. She paused. Business thing. He didn't press. The car was ready by 1 o'clock. He took her through what he'd done, part by part, because that was how he'd always done it. He thought people deserved to know what had happened to their things. She listened carefully and asked 2 more questions and paid without negotiating the price, which he'd quoted fairly. She backed the Aston Martin out of the bay with the careful ease of someone who knew the car well and had missed the way it felt. At the road, she stopped and rolled the window down. You said the 911 is in storage outside of town, she said. 12 kilometers, up 62. I'd like to see it, she said. If that's something you'd consider. Theo thought about it. Not long, he'd learned over the years that he already knew most answers before he started thinking. Saturday morning, he said. I take Lily to hockey at 8. After that, Lily is my daughter. Sutton nodded once, like she was filing this information. Saturday, she said, and drove away. He stood in the lot and listened to the DB9 until he couldn't hear it anymore. This belt was holding. The hose was sealed. The alternator was running clean. He went inside and called the storage facility and told them he'd be in on Saturday with a guest. What he didn't do that night, what he thought about not doing, and then did anyway, was look up Sutton Vane online. He told himself it was practical. He had a habit of knowing who he was working with. What came back was a cleaner picture than he'd expected and a stranger one. Vane Capital was real and substantial. Mid-sized private equity firm based in Toronto with a focus on infrastructure and energy assets. Sutton had taken it over from her father 8 years ago, and by most accounts had restructured it significantly. The articles he found were mostly the kind that got written about business people who were doing something legitimately interesting. Not celebrity profiles, not controversy pieces. A few photographs from industry events. One quote from a panel on institutional investment that he read twice. The most dangerous assumption in capital allocation is that the person across the table wants the same outcome you do. He sat with that for a while. There were also, and this was the part that made him stop, 3 articles from the past 6 months, all behind paywalls, with titles that suggested something was happening at Vane Capital that wasn't being discussed openly. He could only read the previews. The word restructuring appeared in 2 of them, which in business writing usually meant something was being unwound, whether anyone wanted it to or not. He closed the laptop and went to bed. Saturday, Lily scored a goal and spent the drive to the storage facility, explaining the geometry of the shot to him in precise detail, using her hands to demonstrate angles. She was wearing her hockey jersey still and had wet hair from the locker room, and was vibrating slightly with the particular energy of a child who had done something and known it was good. Sutton was waiting in the gravel lot when they arrived. She was in a different jacket from Thursday, dark green, and she was looking at her phone when they pulled up and put it in her pocket when they got out. Lily looked at her with frank assessment. "This is Lily," Theo said. "Lily, this is Miss Vane. You can call me Sutton," Sutton said, looking at Lily with the direct seriousness that Theo was learning was simply her default register. "Do you know about Porsches?" Lily asked. "Some," Sutton said. "Do you?" "Dad tells me things," Lily said. "He thinks I don't listen, but I do." Sutton glanced at Theo. He kept his face neutral. Inside the facility, the 9-1 was where it had been for 2 years, under a fitted cover, in a bay his uncle had paid for annually until his death. Theo pulled the cover off. He hadn't looked at it in several months. He'd been meaning to, the way you're always meaning to do the things that require something more than just showing up. The car was white, or had been. The paint was tired, and there was a significant section of the passenger door and quarter panel where the body had been repaired badly years ago by someone who hadn't cared or hadn't known. But the shape was intact. The roofline had the particular lean-forward quality of the early 911s, as though the car was impatient. Sutton walked around it slowly. She didn't say anything for almost a minute. Lily found a patch of clean floor and sat down and opened her backpack and took out a library book, apparently satisfied that the car had been properly observed. "Your uncle kept records?" Sutton said. "Filing cabinet in the corner," Theo said. "Billed sheets, receipts, some correspondence. He was meticulous." She went to the cabinet. He watched her, read through the documents with the same attention she'd brought to everything else, and he thought, not for the first time, that she had the mind of an engineer, even if her work was in capital. "What would you need," she said, "to finish it? Realistically. Not a number. A picture." Theo thought about it honestly. 8 months, maybe 10. A full engine rebuild, everything refreshed. Sourcing correct spec parts, which takes time. Bodywork done properly. Interior rebuilt to period. "I'd want to do it right or not at all." "What would doing it right cost?" he told her. It was not a small number. She didn't flinch. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the car, and then she turned to look at him. "I want to commission it," she said. "Full restoration. I'll pay for parts and labor at a rate you set. The car stays here until it's done, and when it's done, it's yours." Theo stared at her. "It's already mine." "I know." Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but becoming more precise. I mean, I want to fund the restoration, and then I want to give it back to you, as yours, finished. He didn't know what to say to that. Why? He asked. She looked at the car for a moment before she answered. Because it's the right thing to do with a car like this, she said. And because I'd like to watch someone who knows what they're doing finish it. It was an honest answer, and a complicated one, and he didn't press further. He said he'd think about it. She said that was fair. Outside, Lily had found a beetle on the gravel and was observing it with the patience she brought to things that interested her. When they came out, she looked up and said, "Can I show you something?" And before Sutton could answer, she was explaining the shell patterns on the beetle with complete seriousness, and Sutton crouched down and looked at it and asked 3 questions that were not condescending and not indulgent, but simply interested. And something about watching that exchange made Theo have to look away for a moment. He was thinking about Claire, which he still did. Not with the sharp-edged grief of the first year, not even with the dull ache of the second. Just with the plain fact of her, the way she'd looked at Lily when Lily was figuring something out, and what it meant that she wasn't here to see this particular moment. He was also thinking about the 911 in the bay behind him, under the cover he'd pulled off and hadn't yet put back. His Uncle Pete, who'd bought it from a dealer in 1989 and spent 30 years occasionally returning to it and then dying before it was done. Things that get started need finishing. That was something Pete used to say. Not as a proverb, just as a fact. He called Sutton that evening and told her he'd accept the commission under his terms, and she said she expected nothing less. Over the next 6 weeks, something developed that he didn't have a clean word for. She came back to Merritt Falls 4 times. Once to review the engine teardown, once to discuss part specifications, twice without any professional reason he could identify. She worked from the hardware store cafe, and she stopped by the garage in the afternoons. And she and Lily had a thing now where Lily told her one fact she'd learned that day, and Sutton told her one back. He didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't sure he was supposed to do anything with it. And then in early November, something changed. It started with a name. Aldridge. The same name from the phone call in September. He heard it again when Sutton called him on a Tuesday evening, and this time she was not controlled in the careful way she usually was. She was angry in the quiet, contained way of people who are very good at not being visibly angry. And the edges of it were showing through. She told him a portion of it. Not all of it, but enough. There was a man named Aldridge on her board. She'd inherited the position from her father's era. He'd been working, apparently for some time, to build enough shareholder consensus to force a restructuring vote that would effectively remove her from operational control of the firm she'd spent 8 years rebuilding. "It's not personal," she said, in the tone of someone who knew it was personal. "What are you going to do?" Theo asked. "I'm going to find out what I don't know," she said. "That's always the first step." He thought about the quote he'd found. The most dangerous assumption is that the person across the table wants the same outcome you do, and said nothing. What happened next happened over 3 weeks, and Theo was only partly inside it. He drove to Toronto once, at Sutton's request, to look at the 2 911s she kept in a climate-controlled facility near Etobicoke, a 1969 and a 1989, both in extraordinary condition. While he was there, he met her assistant, a composed young man named Felix, who clearly worried about her, and her lawyer, a woman named Bryce, who clearly didn't worry about anything. He also, on the second evening, met Aldridge, not deliberately. They were in the lobby of the building where Sutton's office was, and Aldridge was leaving as Theo arrived. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of easy authority that came from decades of being agreed with. He saw Theo and took in his work jacket and didn't say anything, but something in his expression arranged itself into a category, not a concern. Theo noted that. He didn't say anything either. What Sutton found, what she had been methodically working toward, was something that Aldridge had not been careful enough to hide entirely. A pattern of communications over 18 months, with 2 funds that had acquired minority positions in Vane Capital, without proper disclosure to the board. The communications weren't criminal exactly, but they were enough. They constituted a material breach of his fiduciary duties, and they were documented in messages that his own assistant had archived improperly, meaning they existed in the firm's system rather than being deleted. Sutton told Theo this in the garage, standing next to the 911 that was now down to its frame on one side while he addressed the bodywork. It was the second week of December, and the heat lamps were on, and Lily was at her grandmother's for the week. "He thought I wouldn't look that hard," she said. "Did that surprise you?" She considered this. That he underestimated me? No. That he was that careless about it? A pause. A little. Theo kept working. He was filling a section of the passenger quarter panel, careful work, the kind that required more patience than skill once you knew what you were doing. He'd missed this. He hadn't realized how much until he'd started. "Sutton," he said. "Yes." He didn't look up. "Are you okay?" It was a simple question, and it seemed to hit something, because she was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "I've been running that firm for 8 years," she said. "I restructured it. I made it profitable in a way it hadn't been. I brought in people I trusted and built something real." And he was sitting in the boardroom the whole time looking at me like I was managing someone else's asset until he could get his hands on it. "So no," Theo said. "No," she agreed. "Not entirely." He finished the section he was working on and set down the tool and turned to look at her properly. She was sitting on the stool, Lily's stool, with her hands around a coffee cup, looking at the car. "You know what Pete used to say about cars that had been badly repaired," he said. She waited. He said the problem isn't the damage. Damage is just what happens. The problem is when someone patches it over without fixing what's underneath, because then you've got the original problem plus a layer of wrong on top of it, and the layer of wrong is harder to fix than the original problem would have been. Sutton looked at the passenger panel, the one he'd been working on, where the bad repair from years ago had been removed down to clean metal. "How long does it take," she said, "to fix that right?" "However long it takes." She nodded slowly, like she was thinking about more than bodywork. The Aldridge situation resolved in January the way these things resolve when the evidence is clear and the lawyers are good. Quietly, without public statement, with Aldridge's position on the board ended by mutual agreement, and the relevant information filed with the appropriate regulators. Sutton called Theo when it was done. She sounded tired in the particular way of someone who's finished something exhausting and isn't quite ready to feel relieved about it. "It's over," she said. "Good," he said. "I want to come see the car. Come Saturday. Lily will be home." She came Saturday. The 911 was not finished. It wouldn't be finished until spring. But it was beginning to look like itself again. The bodywork was clean. The engine was rebuilt and ready to go back in. The color had been decided on, after considerable discussion, the original white, but done properly, down to the correct era paint code. Lily walked Sutton around the car, pointing out each thing Theo had explained to her, in the precise technical language she'd absorbed without being asked to. Sutton listened with real attention and asked one question and said, "Your dad does good work." And Lily said, "I know," with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone stating a thing that simply is. Later, while Lily was inside making tea with a level of ceremony she'd recently decided was important, Sutton and Theo stood in the garage in the particular quiet of an early February afternoon in Ontario. When the cold has been there long enough that you stop fighting it and just accept it as the atmosphere. "I've been thinking about something," Sutton said. "Okay, I keep coming back here." Theo didn't say anything. He was watching the bench, giving her room. "I don't usually go somewhere 4 times without a reason I can name," she said. "I like knowing why I'm doing things." "And do you?" he asked. "Know why?" She looked at him. The light in the garage was the warm yellow of the heat lamps, and outside the window the light was the flat gray-white of February, and she was standing between the two of them. "I think so," she said. He'd been thinking about it too, longer than he'd admitted probably. He'd been thinking about the way she'd crouched down to look at Lily's beetle. About the call in November when the edges were showing. About the way she'd said what the car wanted to be on a Thursday afternoon when he'd expected her to be gone in 2 hours, and she'd stayed for 4. He'd been thinking about Claire, and about what it meant to have loved someone well and lost them, and then found yourself 3 years later in a garage in Merritt Falls with a woman who asked real questions and didn't pretend things were simpler than they were. It didn't feel like replacement. It felt like something that had its own logic, its own weight, its own particular honesty. "Lily likes you," he said. It was not perhaps the most romantic declaration, but it was true, and it was not a small thing. Sutton smiled, a real one, the kind he'd seen a few times now, and still thought was somewhat remarkable from someone who held things so carefully. "I like Lily," she said. "She'll want to be involved in whatever this is," he said. "Just so you know. I'd expect nothing less." Inside, the kettle clicked off, and they heard the sound of Lily attempting to open the cabinet where the mugs lived, which stuck in winter and required a specific technique she had not yet fully mastered. Theo went to the door and pushed it open. "Need help?" he called in. "I got it," Lily said, with the immediate certainty of someone who had definitely not gotten it. He went in anyway. By March, the engine was in, and the car ran for the first time in what his uncle's records suggested was nearly 12 years. Theo started it alone, early on a Saturday morning before Lily woke up, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time with the engine idling. It didn't sound exactly right yet. There was an adjustment needed in the fueling, and he'd identified a small exhaust leak at the manifold that would need to be addressed before any real driving. But it was running. It was present in the world in a way it hadn't been. He thought about Pete, who'd brought this car home in 1989 and had 30 years of intentions regarding it that simply ran out of time. He thought about what it meant to finish something someone else started. He didn't think it meant anything particular about legacy or continuity or any of the things people tried to make it mean. He thought it just meant someone thought this was worth doing, and they were right, and here it is. He texted Sutton. "Engine's running." She replied in under a minute, "I'll be there Saturday." She was. She stood beside the car while he drove it out of the bay for the first time, slow and careful on the gravel, and the sound of the flat six filled the lot, and Lily put her hands over her ears and then took them off again because she wanted to hear it, and Theo stopped the car and got out, and they all stood there in the March cold listening to it idle. "It sounds right," Sutton said. "Close," Theo said. "Manifold leak. Fueling needs work. Another few weeks. But the bones are right." "The bones are right." She looked at him and he looked back, and between them was the car that his uncle had started and he had finished, and his daughter, who was now trying to open the driver's door to see the interior, and the particular pale light of a March morning in Ontario, cold and flat, and edged with the very early suggestion of something warmer coming. He didn't have a word for the thing that was happening. He thought that was probably fine. Not everything needed to be named before it was real.